Okay, so welcome back to the new episode of the Crosse Thinkers Podcast. And today we have Dr. Adam Driscoll from the Social and Criminal Justice Department. We will be talking about sustainable eating and living in an unsustainable age. So the first question I have for you is actually, why do you call this unsustainable age?
Well, I think there are a lot of problems that we are facing as a society, as a species, particularly in terms of environmental limits. And I think almost all the science reports that in terms of our current practices, we are heading for a cliff. And so that's where I think I immediately go to the term unsustainable, because I think if we keep doing what we're doing, we are facing an ecological collapse. We are facing the ruining of our ability to sustain both ourselves as a population and our way of living.
So are you talking about unsustainable, especially from the food perspective?
Definitely that's where my focus is. I think there are a lot of other dimensions of environmental problems we can look at that we could also deem unsustainable.
Okay.
Certainly look at global climate change is a huge one. Thinking about economics, a lot of things about this unfettered capitalist growth that might not be able to go on forever. Thinking about the exhaustion of resources. I think there are tons of ways of thinking about unsustainability. Definitely my focus is more on food just because that's where my interests lie.
So how bad are we in terms of food, and how much longer do we have if we don't do anything about it?
Well, I always say it's never going to end. When we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about ecological collapse. It's not like the planet's going to go poof and all be gone. It's not like all of a sudden we're going to flip a switch and run out of food. It's a lot more, we're going to have enough food for everybody. Are we going to have enough food for the current lifestyle we employ? Are we going to have enough food for people to be eating meat at an American rate? We eat meat. I think we're the highest per capita, somewhere around 270 pounds per year in this country. If everybody on the planet were eating meat at that rate, there's not enough animals to go around. And so, hey, if everybody else's standard of living is coming up and their meat intake is going up with that, something has to give there. Now, again, I don't think it's going to be a catastrophe or all of a sudden we're going to eat all the cows and they're all gone, but something's got to give, whether that's the American way of diet changing and coming down, or the rest of the world doesn't get to come up and reach that American standard of living. And I don't think either side's going to be terribly happy about that. So that's why I would say it's unsustainable. There's some kind of resolution necessary.
Do you believe technology will change that? Will everybody be able to eventually just eat meat?
No. I think technology is amazing, and I'm sure they're going to come up with a million new things I've never thought of, but I don't think we'll ever overcome thermodynamics. And simply thinking about the rule of 10 in biology, pretty much every time you jump a trophic level, only 10% of the energy is maintained from the prior level. There's just not enough food on the planet for everybody.
Exponential decay in terms
Exactly.
of energy. Okay.
Yeah, exactly, in terms of the available calories in the food sources. So I don't think there's enough energy on the planet for everybody to eat meat at the American level. And I don't think it matters how we're producing that meat, what technology we're using. I just think there are some thermodynamic barriers, some ecological barriers that technology can't work around.
It's crazy, actually, how simple this is, right? You just calculate how much energy you got from the sun times
Yep.
the factor times the factor again,
Yep.
depending on how much higher you're in the hierarchy. And boom, the number is just less than
Oh, yeah.
whatever we have from
And
the server.
ecologists have done these kinds of calculations.
Yeah.
Like, this is science that has been around for 60 years, but we don't think about it too much as a population. And certainly the people who are working in agricultural science, that's not the approach they're taking. Those aren't the numbers they're looking at. It's been such a production-based science for so long. They're still, hey, how do we ramp up production? How do we make more? How do we feed the world? And not really thinking about limits, barriers, or issues of distribution.
Interesting. So we communicate by email before this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You gave me a lot of terminologies, which I have no idea what they are. So I'm going to go over them one by one.
Please.
And I'm guessing the first three will be a little bit negative. So we will start with commodity fetishism.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd consider it negative. Certainly it's a problem that we have. And this is a Marxian term. Karl Marx was the one who coined this phrase. And he was talking about just the tendency we have as consumers to view the things that we buy as just existing in an immaculate way, where there's that shirt on the shelf. And we just see, hey, that shirt costs $5. And the only mental calculus we engage in is the use value I'm getting out of that shirt worth the $5 I'm putting in. And we have no thought or conception of, well, what people made this shirt for me? We have no thought about, and that's kind of getting into social relations, like, hey, how much did they get paid? Hey, what conditions were they working under? We have no thought about the ecological relationships behind that shirt. Hey, where did the cotton come from? Hey, how many pesticides were used on that cotton? How much water went to raising that cotton rather than feeding the population in the country that cotton came out of? What were the workers who picked that cotton? What did they get paid? Anytime we're buying that shirt, our $5 is supporting all those relationships. It's going and saying, yes, I want my cotton grown in this way. Hey, I want my workers paid this much. Hey, I want the children in Bangladesh sweatshops, getting paid 10 cents an hour to stitch these. And we're unaware of it. And so that tendency, that blindness toward all those relationships we form when we buy things, that's what Marx deemed commodity fetishism, where we just kind of fetishize the commodity as just existing magically on the shelf with no history, no backstory.
And do you see that thing getting worse and worse?
I think so, mostly because our society, particularly economically, is getting more complicated and more complicated. As our global commodity chains get more globalized, as things trace further and further back, I think it's so much harder to know where your commodities are coming from. Like, honestly, I do my best to educate myself on the things I buy, and I know maybe 5% of what's out there, and most of that's even general and abstract. So I think as we continue getting a more integrated economy, the degree of commodity fetishism we experience is going to go up, just because relationships get more complicated, and less is being produced close to home where we know, hey, I know the farmer who raised this.
So massive production, and also the idea of things are getting cheaper and cheaper.
Yep. And that's that's pretty much the motivation behind all these kinds of changes we're seeing. Is, we can make stuff, businesses can make more money out that way, and we get our products cheaper. But there's a cost being paid for that. I mean, you can't just make things cheaper without something else. All you can do is externalize those costs. You can't make them go away. So if we're getting something way cheaper, well, somebody somewhere is getting paid way less than a fair wage, or some other place environmentally, they're getting their kind of environment compromised to give us these things.
And ultimately, we got replaced by machine, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the industrialization, the mechanization, all that makes labor more productive, but then we're costing somebody a job.
Interesting.
So we get that thing cheaper, but then, our jobs are going overseas, or our jobs are replaced simply by machines.
So last week I talked with Ben Golden from the Department of Theater Arts, and he talked about craftsmanship.
Okay, yeah.
It's like, okay, you take the wood, you actually trim everything and start putting the furniture together, compared to you get several panels from IKEA with a menu.
Yep.
And you totally lose the meaning. And even actually assembling the furniture from IKEA give you some meaning.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's the exact opposite of commodity fetishism, where he's talking where you have a connection to the things you buy. I talk in some of my classes about civic agriculture, which is kind of the agriculture where you're going to a farmer's market, or you're getting your food from a CSA or something, where you know who grew it. You knew what kind of conditions they are. This sounds similar to what Ben was talking about in terms of the craftsmanship of making a product with your own hands, or buying something that you know somebody else made with their own hands. There you're kind of connecting with the things you buy in a way that, normally we're buying at IKEA or buying at Walmart or Festival. We don't have that connection.
So you definitely experience more psychologically by doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Another thing that came to me is just I heard a joke, or I don't know if it's a joke anymore. Like if you talk to kids nowadays, what is a fish? It's very likely they don't know fish has a head and a tail. They only know the fish is just fillets you bought from Woodman.
Yeah. Right. But say, and I'm probably too old. They probably don't think it's a band anymore either, do they?
Yeah.
That's 2000.
Yeah. So the culture where I came from, we appreciate food a lot because we basically face famine basically every 3 or 4 years during the old days. Mm-hmm. But now I can see the new generation don't appreciate food at all.
Yeah,
it's simply because it's just like $2. Like, why do I want to pay attention to that? I work for 1 hour, I got 10 pounds or something like that.
Yeah,
interesting.
Most definitely.
What about agriculture literacy?
Well, this I think is the opposite of commodity fetishism if we're talking just about food. So almost exactly what you're just saying, knowing where your food comes from. Knowing either how that food was raised, knowing what food comes from what animal or what kind of plant. That's what we kind of call agricultural literacy. And in general, the agricultural literacy in our country is abysmal, where people don't know. There's a survey, I believe it was actually done over in London, but it's pretty comparable to the United States. And it was an inner city youth, and they're asking them simply to match up pictures of food products they can buy on the shelves with the plant or the animal it came from on the farm, and it was horrible. Their inability to do so. They were matching milk up with rice. They were matching eggs up with wheat. So because, it seems crazy, but you have to realize from their life experience, Milk was something you bought off the shelf in the store. Coca-Cola was something you bought off the shelf in the store. And the only thing distinguishing the two is, hey, they come in a different container and they taste different. And they have no idea, oh, milk came from the udder of a cow versus Coca-Cola came from a factory. And I think in general, we don't know where our food comes from. Because we're so used to just going to a festival or going to whatever your regional equivalent of the supermarket is, and everything's there. And you're like, oh, of course, I have no idea what grows in Wisconsin. There's asparagus in the middle of the winter, just right here, ready for me to get. Oh, there's cilantro over here. Oh, there's tropical fruit. If all this stuff is always there, why would we know where it comes from?
Is it a consequence that private farming is disappearing?
Well, I definitely think that's linked to the fact that in general our food system has become articulated over the global level. Where now, yeah, everything you can get is grown in whatever region it is that specializes in that has the right growing conditions or simply has the right history and infrastructure to produce that. Here in the Midwest, still a lot of grain, a lot of pork coming out of here, beef coming from Texas. You'll see beef coming from Brazil. You see tropical fruit coming from Chile and cut flowers. Like everybody specialized in their one area and shipping it back and forth. And so I definitely think when you're doing that and you're going to specialize in just one product for a global market, yeah, farms are going to get big, and therefore any small farmers getting squeezed out. And so I think there's a whole history behind how our agricultural system has been transformed that I quite frequently ramble to my students about until their eyes glaze over. But definitely I think that's a big part of why we are seeing kind of a decrease in the small private family farm, and why that's pretty much being kind of obliterated by the larger corporate model.
So, are you familiar with the current situation of the farmers in Wisconsin or Midwest in general?
In the Midwest in general, I would say I'm not nearly as familiar as I would like to be. Most of my research on farming was actually in North Carolina, where I did.
What's happening there?
Well, very much what I've described. Pretty much small farmers are being squeezed out and replaced by larger, predominantly corporate hog production. Because North Carolina used to be a big tobacco-producing state. You could still get by with a smaller farm or a small private farm, but pretty much once tobacco had its kind of collapse as a commodity, all those farmers got driven out. And only those who were able to adopt to large-scale hog production are the only farmers who survived.
Interesting, because I talk with some farmers here with dairy farms, for example.
Yep.
They're losing money every milk they produce, and they don't know where the profit comes from.
Yeah.
And also, if they end up working harder and produce more, that would just push the price even lower.
Yeah.
So they kind of get into this kind of a loop going down. Another thing is just the government actually give you a lot of benefits for doing farms.
Yes.
Compensations.
Oh, yeah. The farm bill was huge.
Yeah, but still with that, you get a better loan and the longer loan and keep getting longer
Yeah,
loan.
but keep
it's almost like a,
bury yourself in this cycle of debt.
Do you see any way they can come back, or basically this is just eventually, this is the trend? Inevitable.
I don't know. I always say good social scientists avoid making predictions because we're always going to miss something. There are trends that can happen, things that will happen that just nobody saw coming. I think it's written for a very interesting 100 years as far as what kind of changes we're going to see. Certainly thinking over the more short term, I don't see this trend stopping. I think we're seeing a shift from some farms where they're able to kind of go small in the opposite direction of kind of becoming more of a niche farm, catering toward the sustainable food market. But currently that's a very limited market, and largely it's limited to middle class and upper white people.
It's more expensive, right?
It's more expensive, and it's more culturally esoteric, where it's a really cool thing if in certain circles to drink organic milk and eat kale. If you aren't in the right circles who are going to value that, why would you pay twice as much? And so I think it's a very limited market that in no ways can absorb the entire dairy industry. And I don't see the kind of mainstream conventional farming model changing that much. I think we're going to continue to actually see increased consolidation as pretty much farms have to get bigger to survive or to still stay alive with a smaller profit margin.
Interesting. How is this thing related to health? Can we say like the literacy will increase the...
Well, definitely as far as people understanding the difference in terms of the health benefits of milk versus Coca-Cola, tremendous. And people understand, the benefits of raw vegetables. I think people knowing that, and I think that literacy is a big part of access to that food. If you don't know anything besides what you've gotten at your corner market in a big city, then yeah, might live on donuts and Kraft mac and cheese and hot dogs your entire life, which are obviously horrible for you, and you're going to have experienced medical problems down the road with that. We've seen such a obesity epidemic. Many people have said soft drinks are a part of that. Certainly not the only thing going on there. But yeah, so many problems with the heart issues associated with the amount of meat we eat. And again, here in America, we're eating more meat than ever. So I think there's a lot of health issues that are definitely indirectly connected to agricultural literacy. It's also probably just we have a lot of poor health awareness as well, as far as people making the connections between, hey, what do I eat? What are the health consequences of that? There's also a huge class dynamic to it, because in general, the food that is available to poor people is not the healthier food. Yeah, if you're eating kale black bean burgers, yeah, they're way more healthy than a bunch of hot dogs. They're also 3 times as expensive. And so I think can't say it's just a matter of awareness. There's also just a huge class dynamic there as well, I think.
Yeah, the reason I bring this is just I'm thinking about for mass production, you certainly have more food, but I'm starting to think about the quality of the food.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, you can more food, more cheaper food, but how healthy is that?
Interesting.
I'd also say it doesn't really taste that great.
I actually don't know. I don't know the difference.
Well, it's personal preference there.
Yeah, some people say like if you got a chicken from the farm compared to the chicken you get from some factory, it's definitely more dynamic and the muscle is just tender.
I think so, and I worked on an organic farm, and definitely the chickens we raised there, I thought tasted better. The turkeys in particular just had a whole different quality of flavor that I've never experienced before. But I'm even thinking about just like somebody's preference for a veggie burger versus a hot dog.
Interesting.
And some of that, so much of that, just hey, what did my parents feed me growing up, and that's what I'm used to, and that's what's going to taste good to me.
Yeah, for kids nowadays, like you must have taste those kind of organic chicken for once in order to tell the difference. Otherwise, you don't even know that thing exists.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You'd have no
chickens.
awareness. Yep. You're just like chicken's chicken.
Yeah. What do you mean by confined animal feeding operation?
So this is how most meat is raised in this country now. Well,
all meat, like pork.
Almost all meat, yeah.
Okay.
Poultry, pork, beef you don't do entirely in CAFOs, because beef pretty much you eat free range for certain period of the life, but then you finish them on grain in CAFOs. But otherwise, pork, chicken, turkey, all raised in CAFOs. And pretty much what they are animal factories rather than a farm, where it's a complete, like I say, it's a tailorization of agriculture, where pretty much the agricultural scientists calculated the exact conditions necessary to maximize growth in as many animals as possible. So then you build this, you can call it a barn, I'd say it's a factory, and it's designed purely to cram in as many hogs as you can or as many chickens as you can, keep them from killing each other, keep them from getting sick even though they're living in such confined conditions, and you keep the temperature, the amount of feed, the amount of water, all that maximized so they grow as quickly as possible, put on as weight as much as possible, and then slaughtered. And so it's pretty much just these massive animal operations. Like a hog CAFO, you can have 2,000 hogs under one roof. Chicken CAFO can have anywhere up to 100,000 chickens. Often chicken CAFOs, like egg-laying ones, they'll be in cages, confined, so they pretty much can't move or waste any energy. So all the energy just goes into those eggs. In the hog CAFOs, they're calculated on size to pretty much be exactly the right size for when hogs are ready for slaughter, that they fill the pen completely. That's pretty much once the hogs are ready for slaughter, they're almost completely immobilized because there's no extra space for them
And
to
you
go
know that's
in.
time to kill them.
Exactly.
Interesting. So can you give us some numbers? Is it crazy, like how fast the chickens or porks can grow?
Oh, yeah. I mean, hog will go from piglet to slaughtering in 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
How big of a hog are you talking about?
Oh, that's like 300 to 350 pound hog. Now, hogs just grow way quicker than human beings do.
Yep.
But that's still quick.
What about chicken?
I honestly don't know chicken life. I know chickens can get to full size within a matter of months, but I don't remember well enough. Most of my work was on hogs, so I know them better than chickens.
Do you see any future technology which even increase that by using genetic engineering to change
Yes.
the way hog is, not just the growing, and they may have 6 legs or even 40
Possibly.
legs?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. We're already actually introducing genetically modified salmon. For the first time, have been approved for sale in U.S. markets. It's a Canadian company that makes, I cannot remember the name of the company or the actual kind of salmon, but they're farm-raised salmon, and they've been genetically modified to pretty much knock out one of their growth inhibitors so they grow year-round. So normally this kind of salmon only grow during like the spring season, I believe, and these ones now pretty much just, they, as soon as they're born, they grow, and they get to kind of their, I don't know if you call it slaughtering the salmon or not, but their harvesting size, like 1/3 of the amount of time a normal one would.
Does it change their mating, their like habitats and everything?
I don't know.
If you grow that fast, why? I mean, when do you have the time to do the
Right.
traditional? Not just that, like swimming back and everything. Like
Yeah, well, these ones are all raised in tanks, so I don't,
they don't even know that.
Yeah, I don't believe the most ones that are raised aren't actually mated. I believe they're pretty much the spawn are tossed in the tank, and then once they've grown up, they're scooped out and treated or slaughtered or whatever they call it with fish, processed probably.
So are there people working on or advocating for ethics for animals, or at least the food animals?
Oh yeah, I mean, PETA's been very involved with this for 30, 40 years, in particular with the treatment of hogs, simply because they're a very intelligent species. In many cases, I've heard they're more intelligent than dogs, and certainly capable of pain, terror, and they're just being raised in what we would consider incredibly inhumane conditions. I mean, I can't remember the name of the scientist who did the work with rats on urban sink, but pretty much he did work with rats where if you can find too many rats, they pretty much go crazy.
Oh yeah, they become zombies. And
and some
stop
start
moving and everything.
and some start like attacking each other and killing each other. They form weird hierarchies, and it's crazy what they do. And like we're cramming pigs in a more dense condition than that, and so. Yeah, I think if you think about just what it must be like for them or the humane aspects, it's barbaric. And there are definitely a whole lot of groups trying to fight it for those reasons. Other people are working against CAFOs for the environmental impacts.
So how to deal with the conflict between, if you give them a better condition, like just even a bigger room, your production definitely decrease.
Oh yeah,
the cost goes up.
Cost goes up, and the numbers come out.
Where's the stand of this?
I think we eat less meat, And again, I'm not saying, oh, God, we have to all become vegetarians. But, like, again, 270 pounds, that's like a quarter of a cow that we're eating every year per person. That's an astronomical number. That's more than we've ever eaten historically. It's way more than we need for health purposes. And I think it's way more than we need even just for, like, enjoying meat.
Why do we do that?
Well, I think there's a lot of historic reasons behind it. Traditionally, meat was the rich person's food. And particularly going back to the time when we were, as a society, nutritionally challenged, meat is incredibly healthy.
So we don't have enough protein.
Exactly. If you don't have enough protein, meat's amazing. Meat is so rich in vitamins, proteins, all these different kind of things. So when you're hungry, like when you're actually challenged to get enough calories, to get enough protein, meat would be amazing. And for a large part of our history, the majority of our population was in that area of being food challenged. But now we flip that. Majority of our population has more than enough to eat, and I think there's this cultural lag. But we still think, oh, meat has to be the centerpiece of any meal or the centerpiece of any good meal. When you think about high cuisine in countries, it's like, oh, eating a big chicken or eating a steak or something involving meat. So our whole culinary tradition, I think, is built around meat being kind of the pinnacle of what you should want to eat.
Like Thanksgiving, like
oh yeah, exactly.
Probably
Thanksgiving.
That's the only time you're gonna have meat if you're poor back then.
Oh yeah, and even then you'd be
year,
lucky if you had turkey on Thanksgiving. Yeah.
And part of that, I can even imagine, it's not even cultural. On top of that, you may have something genetical. It's just like if you need more protein, you just survive longer.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Back in the with food scarcity, right?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, I'm always cautious about kind of looking for genetic explanations for human behavior, just because there's such a gap between our understanding of genetics and the ability to actually say, oh, these genes equate to this behavior. Yep. But definitely there's reason to suspect, probably as animals, like out in the wild, we were programmed to, ooh, this is the more nutrition in this thing. I like this better.
Interesting. Okay, so now let's go to what I quoted from your email, the happier side.
The what?
The happier side when you talk about like sustainable agriculture.
Oh, the happier side of things. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we heard about the conditions about food and everything, and our ignorance of food and commodity fetishism. Now let's talk about what's the idea of sustainable agriculture, and can you give us some kind of examples?
Sure.
Yep.
Now, sustainable agriculture is a very broad umbrella concept that a lot of things fit under. In my class, when I talk about sustainability, I always say you got your 3 pillars. It needs to be environmentally sustainable, economically sustainable, and socially sustainable. pretty much meaning, cool, we're not trashing the environment making this food. We're actually providing food that everybody can eat, not just kind of super esoteric food for rich people. And third, we're making the food people want to eat. Because if we're trying to force the entire population to live on kale and rice, probably going to struggle right there. So the main two kind of dimensions I see of sustainable food or sustainable agriculture are both production and distribution. So with production, I mean, there's a lot of different alternative ways we could be raising our food. Talking about organic agriculture, talking about just locally based agriculture. These are all different ways we could be raising our food that, for the most part, don't buy into that corporate maximizing production model, which is, most of our agriculture is based on, hey, how much food can we crank out as quickly and as cheaply as possible? If we start saying, well, what is a way we can do this that is more ecological, that isn't going to have the same kind of negative consequences for the environment that commercial agriculture has? Because agriculture is one of the most polluting industries we have in this country. We tend to think of agriculture as like, happy red barn and like happy cows and green fields. But at this point, like the corporate agriculture is nothing like that. In agriculture, there's so many different kinds of things. Like it's a leading source of water pollution, one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases, the nutrient pollution that's coming out of agriculture. It's all hideous.
Can you elaborate on that? Like what are the pollutions caused by corporation-based agriculture?
Sure. Certainly one of the biggest ones is nutrient pollution. And here in the Midwest, we throw so much fertilizer in our fields, or when animals are raised in CAFO, the runoff from all their waste, because the waste is pretty much thrown in just big pools out back. All that waste, all that fertilizer runoff is chock full of phosphates, nitrogen, and that then washes into the riverways. And once you get in the riverways, it pretty much just unbalances the ecosystems contained in them.
So that's what they're doing. They're actually throwing that thing into the waterway.
Yeah, I mean, they're not throwing it directly in the waterway, but everything washes downhill.
Oh, okay.
The entire Midwest agriculture all drains down the Mississippi. And if you follow the Mississippi down to when it reaches the Gulf of Mexico, there's a huge dead zone the size of New Jersey down there where nothing grows. Pretty much because that water is so eutrophic. Or pretty much because when you have elevated nutrient levels, little microbes and bacteria and algae all grow really well. Then either when they die and when they rot, they suck out all the oxygen in the water, or sometimes simply when it hits night and they can no longer photosynthesize and their population levels are way too high, again, they suck the oxygen out of the water. And once the oxygen's all out of the water, nothing can live in it. And so pretty much everything just dies. And so that's one of the biggest ecological consequences you have of agricultural runoff.
Interesting. And it's multinational, so it's make it even harder to deal with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is going on everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Like, it's lucky we are living upstreams, so we
Yeah.
can do whatever we want. And whatever happens to you,
people
you're a different state.
downstream are definitely paying the consequences. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so the pollutions So are you trying to advocate for the idea of primate farm again, like locally produced?
Right. Well, usually what they're farming along the lines of what we call agroecology, which is farming not necessarily in an industrial model, but farming in more of an ecological model. And so growing things a little bit more in accord with how they evolved to grow. And so there's so many little things you can do, like simple crop rotation. Like a lot of agroecology is really just growing things how we grew them 100 years ago, back before we had all these synthetic fertilizers and herbicides and things we could dump on the ground that enable like 1,000 acres of one kind of crop to grow. So crop rotation, cover cropping, intermixing different kinds of crops, so you're not leaving a huge field vulnerable to certain pests, or putting all crops that are going to be draining the same nutrients from the soil. Reintegrating plant and animal agriculture. Like right now we have it entirely separate. If you're a corn farmer, cool, you're just growing corn or maybe soy rotation. If you're a pig farmer, you're just growing those pigs and you're importing all your feed. On the farm I worked on, we would actually raise chickens out in movable coops, or pretty much we take them out one of the fields that was lying fallow for that season. Put the chickens in there, we move this like 10 by 10 coop every day. It just takes 5 minutes, pick it up, drag it a little bit. The chickens eat all the slugs out of the field, reducing that pest for when you're growing something later. Their waste becomes great fertilizer because there's small enough numbers that their waste gets integrated in the soil and doesn't just all wash away. Again, that's just restoring kind of what used to be going on in the wild when animals would be roaming, eating things, and there is a lot more of nutrient cycling rather than kind of conventional farming, which is based far more on nutrient throughput.
Interesting. But then how do you make it economically sustainable?
That's the challenge, because you have to charge twice as much. And so I think that's the real crisis, I think, of sustainable agriculture, is figuring out how can we use these ways of growing food at a way that's affordable to everybody. Because right now, most of the food that's raised in far more of this kind of sustainable manner is way more expensive. It's the kind of food you can get in the co-op downtown, or it's the kind of food you can get at a farmer's market, and you're paying 2 to 3 times what you'd be paying at festival for that same food. Now, certainly, if we saw more people switching these methods, that would help bring the price down. I think we simply
from the producer side, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we also and also from the consumer side, because simply right now there's also an esoteric value to that food. When there's only so much organic kale out there. If everybody's growing organic kale, the price would come down as well. But I think we would have to have more people raising food. Because right now, again, with these so few people in these huge farms, there's not as much food being raised, which is actually going to people. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately would require a radical restructuring of our entire food system to get enough people farming by these methods to have the price come down enough that everybody could do it. And sadly, people don't want to farm for the most part. A lot of farmers are actually, one of the biggest problems they're having is getting the next generation to stay on the farm.
Yeah, hobby farm makes sense, but doing farming as a career to feed all your family, it's almost impossible, right? You need to actually, not obviously, but it's really difficult because compared to the corporations, that's number one, and number two is just compared to other, you just get a degree and get paid by salaries. That's going to be just outweigh everything you do in terms of dollars.
Yes, it's usually much more profitable. I mean, you can still make money in farming, but you have to be a big farm to do it, or you have to have a very specialized niche market. Mm-hmm. And so it's definitely...
It's kind of hard to find a sweet spot between too much technology and too few technologies.
Yeah, or even the right technology. Because people raising food in a sustainable fashion or organic fashion, they're still using tractors. They're still using technology. They're still getting the newest kinds of seeds. They're just being a lot more selective on what technology they use. And they're certainly not using everything that's kind of coming out of our corporate agricultural system.
Interesting. What about the other one? That is the scarcity of farmland. If more people start a farm and the production per farm kind of reduced because people are doing organic stuff, do we have enough farmland?
Well, yes. Honestly, the production per acre of organic farming is much higher than conventional methods. It's the production...
compared to the corporate... Oh, okay.
Oh, yes. It's the production per farmer that's so much less.
I see.
Because right now we have 1,000 acres of corn. The amount of corn per acre you're growing there is not nearly as much as if you had a densely planted, multi-cropped polyculture acre planted like organically. But you can have one guy on a huge tractor managing that entire 1,000 acres. And you're raising that 1,000 acres in polyculture organic, you'd have to have hundreds of workers out there. So we have plenty of farmland. That's not the issue at all. It's how many farmers we have that would be the issue.
Why people are, in addition to like farmers got paid less in general, just compared to industrialized job.
Yeah.
Are there any other factors driving farmers away from being farmers?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically we've always valued white collar jobs more. And somewhat that probably is linked to the fact that farming has never been a luxurious occupation. Like right now actually might be the high point for how much money you can make as a farmer, because so many people have gotten out of it. And because the farmers who remain are now running huge farms. But I think in general, it's just always been viewed as kind of like a poor man's job. It's historically been viewed as like not as desirable as working in an office, working with a computer. In general, I think our society's always viewed working with your hands as less noble as working with your head. And I think that's...
Education.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Gotta get bigger degrees, then you'll get better jobs. And I think, well, certainly that's where our salaries come from, people pursuing these degrees. I think that's a problem. I think there's a lot of beauty and nobility in farming, or working as a plumber, or working as a mechanic. But just in our society, we've tended not to respect those positions as much.
Especially, you need to give a lot of people different alternatives. Like, even though there are so many schools here and so many programs here, but actually only a selectable like a proportion of the population can actually graduate from undergraduate school. So
Yes, although
Yeah.
that proportion's increasing
It's
every day.
increasing, yeah.
And we're experiencing degree inflation as a result.
yeah, so eventually this thing has to change, or something is gonna happen.
Yeah.
What about immigrants? Do you think immigrants can solve those kind of problems partially?
I don't think they're necessarily going to solve those problems.
Just the
I
lack
don't-
of laborers and farming laborers.
Right. For the most part, I think they're coming in definitely filling a very important niche, and typically this is huge in California, where again, like 1/3 of our food is all grown. Of being, those workers out there working with their hands. But I think in many ways, the migrant workers, the immigrant workers, are propping up this corporate system at the same time, because they are willing to kind of do all of this work that your normal American workers wouldn't do. And some kinds of food, like strawberries or tomatoes or lettuce, you can't harvest that with a huge combine or anything. And so in this case, you need manual labor, and pretty much we need people willing to work for less than what we would consider the American working wage to keep that system going. But at the same time, that then perpetuates this corporate model of agriculture. The fact that we have kind of an exploitable workforce, and that problem dynamic gets even much bigger when we think about our agricultural system globally, and the amount of people who are working overseas for even way less and still producing the food that we eat.
Interesting. So that actually ties back to the third one, which is social sustainability, right? Like how to make people value the position as a farmer, how to make people eat the food.
Yeah, how to make people care about the food and think more than just, hey, what's the quickest, cheapest thing I can get? Yeah, and how to still make sure you're giving people the food they want. Because I don't think you can ever just impose on people like, hey, eat less meat because I said so. Like, people have to want these things. People have to care about these things. People have to be educated on these issues and concerned on their own right, or else I don't think social change would ever happen.
So these three things kind of build on each other.
Yeah, hopefully
Then
they work
for
together.
the social part, has anybody done anything, and who are doing those kind of things? Nonprofit, government, especially the education and the social part.
Hopefully professors. I like to think we're a part of that in terms of the things we choose to teach about in our classes. And hopefully we're teaching things that students are concerned about and want to learn as well. I think there are a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot. There are some nonprofit organizations that are working to help increase this kind of education. Where I'd really like to see some change is in terms of the USDA. Because there's a lot of money that the government has that's all currently behind the corporate model of agriculture. And if just a small fraction of that were being devoted toward sustainable agriculture in terms of teaching people about this, letting people know a little bit more about where their food came from, rather than just pumping out more versions of the antiquated food pyramid that tells people eat more meat because it's the best thing for you, I think we could see a lot of change there. But again, mostly the USDA is driven by
Corporations.
yeah, agribusiness, by ADM, by Monsanto, by Cargill. And if they're the ones pushing the farm bill, it's going to stay how it is in terms of subsidies for corporate agriculture.
Interesting. I have no idea the situation of Americans' food supply. How much of it is imported and how much is actually produced here?
We are a net exporter of food in
Okay.
terms of volume. And now we are a huge importer of food in terms of so many different things that just don't grow well in the United States. Think about just, again, bananas. There's, I think possibly you can grow bananas in Hawaii, but otherwise nowhere. And we are huge banana consumers. Like we're importing so much of that. All the different kinds of tropical fruit, all these different kinds of weird things. Like I just made asparagus over this weekend. It was from Mexico. So we get a whole lot of our kind of niche items, a lot of things you'll find in the grocery stores that are all coming from elsewhere. We also are a huge importer of processed food, just because it's a lot cheaper to do that processing elsewhere. But in terms of just calories raised, I mean, the Midwest alone could feed America in terms of just the amount of grain and protein we produce right here. But so much of that then just gets sent overseas. Some of it, like we're producing more food than we need as a society. I remember in some cases we're actually producing almost twice as many calories as we need. And a lot of that gets sent overseas as part of food aid, which could also be seen as food dumps, because we flood developing nations with all this extra food that we can grow so cheaply out here, and then that undercuts food producers in those countries to the point where then they're kind of getting driven out of business just by all this free calories we're pouring into them.
So how is the industry making big money by exporting food?
Um, no, I don't think they're making a whole lot of money exporting food. I think a lot of it's being made through government subsidies, which
That's
is
kind of
why.
strange, right? You produce if you do sustainable farms, you can actually you produce less food because you don't have enough labor, right? Even
Right.
for that, but actually it's good enough to feed the whole country.
Yeah,
And by making more, you actually don't sell it for a large profit.
right. But definitely, I mean, some of the argument is this maintains our food security, that we have such a big excess of food.
Wow.
But I think it's a thin argument. Or again,
Yeah, it's like you're writing a big rain check every year to protect something which will happen like I don't know, like 100
Yeah.
years later or something.
yeah,
right?
potentially. Or,
And
yeah.
while at the same time you pollute your food, you pollute your land, you pollute
Yep.
your water and everything
Yeah.
for basically nothing. Almost feel like
Well,
right?
for profits. I mean, because definitely there's still the agribusinesses are making tons of money. I mean, I think
Okay.
like again, Monsanto, ADM, Cargill, like there's some of the biggest corporations we have.
So they just make money by selling food to domestic people, domestic
Yeah,
market.
and mostly through value added systems.
Oh yeah.
Like 'cause you don't make your money selling grain, you make your money selling cornflakes, or again, you don't sell a chicken, you sell chicken McNuggets. Like
Mhm.
there's so much money being made along every stage of our food process because of how many different middlemen there are between a farmer and a consumer.
That's interesting.
And so
Yeah.
there's-
So they grow big enough, eventually they go vertically and just take even the production of the raw material.
Yeah, in many cases, like in North Carolina, that was a big, pretty much criticism of Smithfield Foods because they managed to both horizontally and vertically integrate the entire hog system. We said they own the pigs from birth to bacon, where they own like the piglets, they own the farms, they own the slaughterhouse, and they owned all the brand names that were finding their way to the shelves.
So it's a life cycle going from a hog all the way to the pork on your
Yep,
on
and
your dish.
Smithfield pretty much, and therefore they own the profits to be made at every stage along that process.
Do you think USDA or the government has some control of this? It's just like, hey, up to this level, you need to give the room for the private farmers.
Yeah, I think they're good. And actually, Iowa was a great example of this because Iowa used to have a packer ban, which pretty much said if you slaughtered pigs, you were not allowed to raise pigs. And this pretty much prevented that kind of vertical integration. Iowa abandoned that packer ban when they started getting outcompeted and undercut by North Carolina pork. Because North Carolina pork was being made cheaper because pretty much they had vertically integrated it. And so to keep the farmers competitive, they had to, or to keep the whole industry competitive, they eliminated that packer ban. But there's no reason like we couldn't institute that everywhere.
It's interesting to see whichever industry you are in, like economic values destroying or conflicting with social and what's the other one? Social and environmental.
Yeah. No, most often that's definitely what a lot of my students in my classes come to the eventual conclusion of is like it's almost like capitalism isn't just inherently good.
Yeah, nothing. There's almost nothing we can do about it. It's like if you can sell something for $2 instead of $3, eventually you're gonna win no matter what.
Usually, yep, that's definitely the economics behind that. I mean, people respond to incentives, and if all other things are being equal, yeah, we're going to choose the $2 option over the $3 option. Now, if all things aren't equal, where we think, oh, that $2 option that's going to give me cancer, is $3 option let me live forever. Oh yeah, then we're going to choose the option. Obviously, that's an exaggeration, but if we can find reason to convince people that there are merits in these other forms of food or whatnot, where people are willing to spend that extra money for something they perceive as tasting better or being healthier or just wanting it more, then you can see change where then that the industry market will shift to that demand.
Are there any country in the world who is doing this kind of thing and who are pretty successful?
Yeah, actually, Cuba is often used as one of the models of an incredibly sustainable food system, and it's entirely not by choice.
So what's the story?
It's a great one. I teach in multiple of my classes, and a lot of environmental sociologists and sociologists of food and agriculture have looked at Cuba the same. But pretty much going back to when Cuba was essentially, Cuba used to be a colony of the United States, a sugar-producing colony. They had the Communist Revolution, and we cut them off and pretty much put an embargo on Cuba. They formed trade alliances with the Soviet Union. And pretty much they were selling sugar to the Soviet Union, importing oil, and had just a normal industrial, conventional model of agriculture. When the Soviet Union collapsed, we maintained our embargo, and Cuba was pretty much cut off from oil. And so their entire farming system collapsed because they could no longer farm in the traditional, conventional manner. And they went through about a 5-year period. They call it the special period, when pretty much Cuba was starving to death.
2000, the year 2000.
No, this is back in the 90s, I want to say.
1990.
So USSR collapsed 92.
92, 90,
Yeah.
90 or 92.
Yeah, around there. I'm pretty sure this is happening in Cuba. Like, I want to say around 1995-ish was about somewhere around that 5-year period. But the average Cuban lost something like 30 pounds. Just 'cause as a country, they were just starving to death. Now, they managed it within that 5-year period to radically overhaul their agricultural system. They pretty much took all the sugar plantations, broke them back up, and made them into smallholder farms. Started farming using oxen again. Started farming according to agroecological principles again, like using crop rotation, green manure. Started using a lot of urban agriculture. And they had a huge part of their population went back to farming. And pretty much after that 5-year period of adjustment, they were back up to normal caloric intakes, raising just as much food. And according to the researchers who've gone down there and done interviews, like most Cubans kind of like, this ain't that bad. We kind of like this food. We think it's nice grown this way. We don't mind working in agriculture. But there's reason to suspect that if we opened our borders to Cuba, started exporting oil to them again, they'd probably revert as well. So it's definitely a model that it's possible to do this at a national level.
We don't have much choice.
Yeah, exactly. It's very different than saying, they voluntarily did this. Yeah.
So there are no countries who voluntarily are studying doing this.
Not as far as I know.
Interesting. So yeah, it's hard to compete with globalization and
it's
industrialization.
The gravity of globalization. Yeah.
Interesting. So let's talk about I don't know if I copied it right. Civic agriculture or
civic agriculture.
Civic.
Yep.
Okay. And locally integrated agricultures, they're the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. Civic agriculture is pretty much, again, people knowing where their food comes from. Mm-hmm. And so, like, the immediate examples of civic agriculture are, being a part of a CSA, a community-supported agriculture system, going to farmers markets, going to local buyers co-ops. These are all examples of ways in which farmers are directly marketing their goods to people, and people are buying directly from farmers.
Cutting the middleman.
Exactly, cutting out that middleman, and then you're connecting people to their food sources. Now, a lot of benefits of civic agriculture. One, just kind of keeping all of those exchanges local, keeps kind of the money in local circulation, and so you get a lot more economic multipliers out of that. Certainly as far as the agricultural literacy it creates when people are knowing their farmers, when people are like talking to them like, hey, what makes these tomatoes taste so good? And the farmers talk a little about how those tomatoes are raised, or the fact that, hey, this is some weird heirloom varietal, not just kind of the standard red tomato we get at festival. I think those are also additional benefits that come about with civic agriculture.
Has anybody done any research or associations between community belonging and sustainable farming or civic farming?
Yeah, Thomas Lyson is actually probably the best known name in this area of research, and he's the one who coined the term civic agriculture. There's a lot of other people who followed up on his work that, again, do the same thing. They talk to people who are doing this kind of farming, talk to people who are members of CSAs, why they do it, what they think their benefits are. There's been a lot of survey research kind of trying to get a wider slice of that same question. And yeah, most of it shows that people do at least report a stronger sense of connection and belonging with the food, but also the proportion of our population that's participating in civic agriculture is very small. And so I don't know how much we can know studying just such a tiny corner of our population.
If I think about Midwest, right, in La Crosse,
Mm-hmm.
like the farmers are proud of producing something that can only be produced in local or even under certain family names. And meanwhile, I go there and talk to people.
Yep.
And it's actually increased my connections with the whole community. And farmers market can almost become like public activity, basically just like people gathering together, right, regularly and do something. So, and we're actually also throwing a lot of money to just build those kind of community belongings. Why don't we just multiple channels work together? It seems like economic and social and environmental cannot be separated apart. Why don't we just do it all together?
Right.
But then we have multiple channels of fundings and multiple benefits from it. It's almost like a multiplier for not just in economics, right? It's
Exactly.
Like
yeah.
everywhere.
Other benefits. Yeah. In other realms. Yeah. And definitely, again, this is kind of what gets people excited about civic agriculture and these ideas of like, oh, we're building community, we're bringing people together. Oh, and people are like, we're keeping more money in the community, and people are buying local. That's good for economics. But then the question is, well, what proportion of your food or your family's diet actually comes from that farmer's market?
Even doing that will increase, right? But
It
not
increases,
much.
but it's still like I think some of the research I've seen somewhere between 5 to 10%, where that 90% is coming from festival.
Yeah, if I think about my family, it's not even 5%.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. I mean, in fact, you're going to any farmer's market, it's probably puts you above the average for the American. But that's where again we see like, oh, it's almost like rather than grocery shopping, it becomes a fun activity.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, this is cool. Like I was just this Sunday, I was at the winter market over in Myrick Park, and it was great. There was somebody who was playing guitar. There was neat soap you could buy as well as that food, and it was just so many people were there for the cultural aspects of it, for the enjoyment of it. But I really would love to talk to each one of those people and see how big of a proportion of what they eat actually comes from that market or comes from CSAs. And usually, I think, again, 5 to 10% at best.
Given that also not many farmers are joining the farmers market.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And most of those farmers are, again, they're part-time farmers. They're small niche farmers. There are no, like, big conventional farmers being represented there.
Interesting. What about, I heard those kind of constructions in the name of sustainable agriculture or anything, it's almost like you have multi-layer of productions. Like you produce some kind of plants, and the plants feed the fish. The fish waste go to whatever you feed to the hogs, and the hogs waste goes to. So, what about are these kind of things related to sustainable?
Well, absolutely, and that's one of the parts of agroecology, of integrating the different kinds of plants and animals in a way that kind of they're all working almost like a little functional ecosystem. And that's kind of the same thing with using the chickens out on the field. What you're kind of describing is even a more complicated integrated system, but definitely there are tons of people who are still doing experiments with this. Like one of the great things I saw, and this was just a demo structure, but it was a hydroponic aquaculture combo, where pretty much they had like one of these like 300-gallon tanks, and in that they had a bunch of tilapia, which are a kind of fish you can eat. Connected to that tank was pretty much a hydroponic vertical system, where pretty much the hydroponic system would wick water up from those fish, and the plants that were growing out the side of it. They had a lot of different lettuces, and I think they even had some tomatoes and whatnot. Now some of the droppings from the plants would go down, the fish would eat that. The fish waste that was going into the water would then actually be absorbed by the plants and actually became part of their nutrients. And it was just an incredible little, like, again, they had calculated everything in terms of the number of fish they could have, number of plants to actually be one balanced ecosystem. So there definitely things like this are possible. And God, they're even possible at larger scales. Like there's a great, I show a TED talk by Dan Barber, who's a famous chef from New York who's really interested in sustainable agriculture. And he found a farm over in Spain. I hope I'm remembering the details of this correctly. But
We're
they
allowed to make mistakes, like I said.
cool, good, yeah.
If it end up being some other country, be my guest.
Yeah, maybe Portugal. I'm pretty sure Spain.
Europe.
Yeah. And pretty much they just had a huge wetlands. They had pretty much devoted toward fish farming, and it was such a large system that pretty much they didn't do anything. They just kind of let all the fish go, eating their normal things they would be eating in the wild. They had shrimp growing over here, eating what they were eating. Birds could come in here and just eat their fish and whatnot. And it's such a large, complicated system that it was entirely self-sustaining. And so it's almost like, was that a farm or was that a wildlife preserve? And
Depending on whether you sell the food or not.
yeah, they sold the food.
Yeah.
Yep, it was commercially available, and they got a lot of food out of that. And so it was an amazing example of that same kind of integration. And what's, again, possible if we start farming according to ecological principles rather than just industrial ones.
So let's assess this thing like here, this ecosystem they build. Is it environmentally sustainable?
Very. It
Very,
actually
right.
cleaned the water. Like pretty much water that was coming into the system was pulled from the big river, and when it was leaving the system, it was cleaner than when it went in because of
Okay.
the amount of bioremediation that happened in those wetlands.
Is it more economically sustainable?
I don't know 100%, but I'm pretty sure the fish they're selling are more expensive
Oh,
than the fish that they would be selling from a more that were wild caught or raised in a less sustainable system. So economic is kind of
Because for me, if I think about it, here is where we are right now, right?
Yep.
One way we can do is actually we can go backwards in technologies and go to the old ways of doing things.
Yep.
Another way we can go is actually go forward
Mhm.
into that's the ecosystem you just described is what I would say like advanced in technology
Yeah.
to have a better designed system and everything.
Yeah.
And we're talking about how this one will be working, but then the thing go against it is actually economic values. But now going forward, it seems like do you see this kind of technology eventually, if we develop enough, they will become cheaper and
Possibly. It becomes if we develop it enough. Again, I don't know if it's 100% a technological issue because I think it would come down to more to how many people are necessary to raise that food and just. There's one thing I'm very impressed by our commercial agricultural system is how far we've used technology to just crank food out as cheaply as possible. And that's been its lodestone of what it's been developing for 60 years. And it's very, very good at it. And so I don't know if technology will enable movement to continue in that direction while still internalizing all the costs that so far keep being externalized, which have made it so profitable.
because I think about there's a company actually in the north to the north of La Crosse doing similar kind of thing. They build fish and plants and put them together.
Okay.
For me, if you work there, you almost work like a scientist. It's
Yeah,
like you're
it
a
sounds like it, yeah.
noble farmer.
Yep.
With
Well, I mean,
white clothes and you need to clean your hand, put it on glasses and the microscopes all the time. It actually is thinking about the social part. Number one, working there can be fun.
oh, I bet.
Technologies, right? And number two is if I eat some food coming out of it, it's almost like something I'm gonna talk with other people all the time. Just like, do you know where this fish come from?
Right.
And that's where my
I
story
made
comes
this-
from.
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
So if economically this one can become sustainable, it feels like a better pattern, better model than what we have right now.
I definitely think so.
But my question becomes like I've heard about this thing since 20 years ago. Why I always see a demo? It's always a demo.
Yeah.
Is there any element which make it not practical, just like hydrogen cars or electrical cars until
Yeah.
recently?
I mean, again, one I think oftentimes there's a reason why our conventional system evolved
Yeah.
the way it did,
Yeah.
and that was because it is the cheapest thing. I mean, that's one of the cases where I think Adam Smith was very right about the market correcting itself and finding whatever is the way of maximizing these elements. And definitely our system has managed to move. Yeah, we're making the food as cheaply as possible, as much as possible. And I think anything that moves away from that, moves off that path, it's not going to be as cheap, and it's not going to be as plentiful. Or again, the continuing technology that's making it cheaper and more plentiful is moving in that same direction, which is not thinking, oh, can we also be incorporating environmental sustainability into this? Anytime you're incorporating a new element into it, you're going to stop maximizing the elements you have been. So that's why I think so many of these different, we have great examples of other ways of doing this. Like in North Carolina, they have tons of ways of raising hogs in a more sustainable fashion. They have methane capture things you can cover the hog lagoons over. They have integrated wetlands, constructed wetlands you can use to break down all the hog waste, but none of them are as cheaper as just dumping them in a big pile out back.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know if we're going to see technology come about, if there's going to be some way of tweaking those ways of technology just to make them cost less, because simply they're always making you do something extra. And again, I think this almost comes down to thermodynamics. You can't just have more for nothing.
Yeah, the entropy just
exactly.
keep increasing.
Yeah.
For me, when you talk about going back to the traditional way, I just can't see how that thing is going to work because you need more people to work and everything, right?
Yeah. Well, here's
At least for this one, I can see, the only issue here is make it cheaper, but the other two element got satisfied. At least you don't need more labor.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just a matter of how advanced or how efficient you can design this thing so eventually that thing will become comparable to what we had before.
Right.
Even just using fewer lands and fewer inputs.
Yes. Now, one thing I may challenge on saying, like, we'll never go back to more people being in farming and whatnot and using more of that small scale, because our entire system is predicated on cheap oil.
Yeah.
And if all of a sudden oil starts, and I'm not saying, we run out of oil. I'm just saying if the price of oil goes up enough, all of a sudden that we're going to see some reversal. Where I think if we start paying $6 at the pump, what that's going to be costing to raise the food the way we're doing so, it's going to make a lot more sense to pay people to be working, I think.
Interesting. So again, Adam Smith, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about environmental justice. You mentioned this in your email.
Yep.
Can you give us the definition of the concept and some examples about this is a case study for environmental justice?
Absolutely. When we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about who are the ones paying the prices of environmental degradation. Who are the ones who are having the landfills put near their homes? Who are the ones who are downstream of the pollution we're dumping in the river? And for the most part, what environmental justice finds is that our communities of color and our impoverished communities are the ones who get a disproportionate amount of environmental harms and don't have nearly as much access to environmental goods like parks, like clean water, the kind of things we all want to be living next to. Like probably a great case of environmental justice would be the North Dakota pipeline and the big fight we just saw over that, where pretty much originally that pipe was slated to go north of Bismarck. But pretty much the citizens of Bismarck, which are all well-to-do white people, said, no, we don't want our water supply to be endangered if there was an accident with that pipe. So the company, we rerouted, put it north of a Native American reservation. Native American reservation made the exact same objection. We don't want this north of us, or if it ruptures, our water supply could be damaged. And people said, we don't care. You're a poor community or community of racial minorities, and we're not going to budge. We have to go somewhere, and kind of like it flows downhill.
Interesting. So that's a factor of all the factors that people of color, minority, political power, economical power factored in. How do you do those kind of harms to the environment at which place?
Yeah, exactly.
What about the places that nobody live? Is it justified if you just dump them?
I mean, one, I'd say there are very few places nobody lives. This definitely is what we've been doing for the most part. I mean, if you think about nuclear testing, probably one of the most ecologically dangerous things we're capable of doing. Most of the tests we've done in this country, we've done in the Southwest, because that is the area that is the least populated, and the area that is the least agriculturally productive.
I would Nevada, so big.
Right, exactly.
Big bomb. Dig note it and see the hole.
Yep. But those also are the areas where most we see the highest percentage of Native American reservations, because that is the areas they have been forced onto, as pretty much all of the more productive land kept getting taken up by white settlers. And so we're thinking, we're putting it where the least number of people are, but the people who are there are one of the most marginalized groups that are in the country. And so again, I think that's anytime we try that, go where no people are, there's still going to be some people there, and the people who are there are probably going to be the least powerful and the most oppressed people.
But even if there are like no people there, is this still a matter of environmental justice, or actually basically you can do whatever you want?
No.
Or should you even?
I definitely would not be environmental justice. I'd say if you're not involving people, if people are not the ones being hurt, I would say it's not a matter of environmental justice.
What about animals?
Certainly I think there's a great argument you can make that animals have an inherent right to life, or that this kind of deep ecology, the idea that nature, we are as one species have no particular right to harm other species. I don't know if I agree necessarily with that philosophy. Mostly I think all species are trying to compete with other species, and I think we're just as justified.
So
even if we're
is
winning.
it fair to say you're a believer of natural selection? And if you
I don't think I'm a believer in it. I think it's a phenomena.
Okay.
I think it's happening. I think we've seen huge evidence that, look at the fossil record. Look at what we can reproduce even in labs with bacteria. Natural selection happens. I used to always say evolution is not a theory, it's a phenomena. It's an observation. And as far as just what are the rights of species versus other species, I think rights are a human social construct. We're the only ones who even think along these lines.
Yeah, because when I think about environmental justice, I think, if you have people, of course we can discover the justice just from the ethical point of view.
Right.
But if you start to dump things into the public area, like with across multiple nations,
right,
like public ocean, like for example space, if you throw garbage into the vacuums in the space outside Earth, but eventually who knows when we are going to exploit those kind of space, right?
Right.
Or around moon or around orbit.
Yeah.
Like Is there any?
I mean, I definitely don't think there are any current environmental justice ramifications of those or aspects of that. But I think it's often, we think of so many forms of environmental degradation as being kind of justice neutral, like global climate change. There's definitely an argument. People say, oh, this is a problem that affects us all. But some of us are going to be more vulnerable than others. And particularly the poorer nations are going to be the ones like pretty much don't have the infrastructure to protect themselves. Some of the nations are just going to be geographically the most vulnerable. Low-lying island nations tend to be some of the poorest nations out there. Even here within the United States, the people living in floodplains.
Oh, I've been there. Louisiana, it's terrible.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think even some of these forms of environmental degradation that we don't immediately see having an environmental justice angle to them, there's one that we're just not aware of. I don't know quite what it'll be when we start chucking garbage into space, but somehow I feel like still poor people will be the ones getting screwed when it starts falling back down. Heinlein, the science fiction writer, whose full name I'm blanking on right now, but he wrote one of the books, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and that was a book about sometime in the future when pretty much we've colonized the moon, and pretty much the people who are living up there were kind of we're a food colony for the mainland, for the main country. And so it was really interesting just to project like, oh, wow, we've managed to colonize the moon. We're so much more technologically sophisticated, and we're still screwing over poor people.
It's the same pattern. You set the prisoners there first.
Yep.
And let them work like, no human rights, no anything, and you're on the moon. What do you expect?
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so environmental justice thing.
Robert Heinlein, that's it.
With your vision, from food point of view or in general, do you have belief in human future? Like, are we sustainable in general?
I don't think we're sustainable right now. I think we're going to adjust before catastrophe.
When would that happen?
Honestly, I think it's going to happen when the price of gas goes up. I think this is going to be the biggest thing, the biggest barrier we encounter is our entire way of life is predicated on cheap oil. And it's inevitable that's going to run out. There's certainly a lot of arguments about when that is going to run out. Are we currently in a period of peak oil? Is peak oil around the corner? We don't know 100%. But this could be something where we start seeing these consequences in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. But it is happening. It is inevitable. And I think we'll see huge changes when pretty much so much of our life is going to get restructured. And I don't think it's going to be like going off a cliff where all of a sudden, we're killing each other at the pumps just for those last drops of gasoline. It's going to be a slow economic evolution. Or pretty much, when the price of oil hits $4 a gallon, all right, we'll see these changes. When the price of oil hits $6 a gallon, we're going to see a lot more people moving to the cities, less people living out in the country, less people living in the suburbs. Price of oil hits $8 a gallon. All of a sudden, offshoring reverses itself. Jobs keep coming back because it costs more to transport things across oceans than the money you're saving in other countries, paying people less. So I think that's what I think is going to be kind of the turning factor. That's just going to really undo a lot of our modern living. And some of those changes are going to be bad. Some of those changes are going to be good. So I don't think it's going to be catastrophe, but definitely think the world our children's children live in is not going to be anything like the world we live in.
So we do the adjustment, whatever it takes, and whatever that means. Unless we have new technologies for new energy resource, right?
But even there, again, I don't think we can ever uncover. You can't make energy out of nothing.
Yeah.
And I think again, that's thermodynamics. And so
At least we can actually hit type 1 civilization where we can utilize all the resource we got from the planet.
Yeah.
And then maybe Moon, maybe the Mars.
Right, potentially. I don't know. I feel like the transport costs from any kind of off-planet travel are going to be prohibitive.
Interesting.
We will do it, but it will never be something we can do that's economically like, we're mining ore from Moon. I don't think. Just because, again, transport makes no sense. It'll be way cheaper just to, like, perfectly recycle the gold that's in the ocean. Like, that'll be cheaper than, I think, getting gold from the moon.
So after all, like, the major driver is a single factor, which is economics.
Well, I think I don't want to say it's a single factor driver, but it's
you
can't avoid it.
The fossil,
right, it's one you can't avoid.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, so many other factors will change around that and with that. Our food system will reconfigure. our culture will change as far as what is the expectation. Like right now, it's of course you drive your car. Everybody drives their car. Why would you ever not drive your car? Price of oil is $6 a gallon. People are like, why are you driving your car? That's so weird. That's
Rational.
so strange.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
not rational.
Yeah.
Interesting. So yeah, because I see so many people talking about in order to change this and make change, we need to do something culturally. We need to advocate. We
Yeah.
need to do the education and everything.
Mhm.
And eventually, all the trend I see is just, if you just change the price, everything got solved.
Yeah, I mean,
Almost.
I think definitely just in our culture currently, we tend to prioritize economics. That tends to be in Habermas called this the colonization of the life world, where pretty much just economics becomes everything. And we're definitely very deeply steeped in that mentality right now. But I think it's an error to ever try to isolate one aspect of our society. Or one aspect, like to say like, oh, the cultural realm, that'll fix the economic. Or, oh, the economic will change and that'll fix the cultural realm. Or, oh, once we get our agriculture straightened out, then all of a sudden they're all interrelated. They're all interconnected. And you can't change one without changing the others. So I think that's one of the things that makes change so hard. But I also think it's just, if we're being honest with ourselves, we can't ever talk about just changing one thing and seeing everything else fall like a pair of like dominoes. It's not how the world works.
It's just not simple.
Nope. That's if I always think I frustrate my students with is anytime we're talking about social change or how to fix these things, the answer is always, it's not that simple. Human existence is incredibly complicated, and any kind of change at the societal level, it's tricky. And
Not a single position, a single person, a single way, a single occupation, a single political figure, political power position, or economical position is going to change it.
Exactly.
And whenever you make an action, you don't even know that's going to make a positive or negative impact until
sometimes
very,
you don't
very
know.
late.
Yep, fully exactly. What will be the consequences of this? DDT was going to be a miracle technology that saved us all from malaria. Also gave us cancer. Unintended consequences are huge. Yeah.
Then what's the message? What's the point of learning science to impact the world then, if everything is so unpredictable?
Well, I think our prediction models get better. I mean, I think if science is as a occupation, nothing more than improving our power to predict. And Lord knows it's so much better now than it was 100 years ago, or so much better than it was 500 years ago. We should never think it's perfect, and we should always, if we're being good scientists, we're always being aware this is a limited basis for understanding. Not that it's a bad basis for understanding, but neither is it a perfect basis for understanding, and we'll never have the ability to 100% predict things. But as we keep getting better at that, as we keep learning more about how the world works, as we keep operationalizing more and more of these variables out there, I think our understanding grows and our predictions do get better. And there's some definite value in that, I think.
That's a beautiful way to end it.
Cool.
We hit the mark of 1 hour, and thank you so much for being today.
All right. Hey, it's been a pleasure. Great. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.